Alan Poul is an executive producer and director on the new Netflix limited series The Eddy, which comes from Damien Chazelle. I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby, here to ask Alan. You direct the last two episodes of the series, both of which feature a lot of different musical numbers. Can you tell us about just directing those sequences that center on live music and, making sure the camera's in the right place and making sure everyone knew their cues, and just what challenges you might have faced in doing those sequences?
I'm allowed to give spoilers, right?
Yes.
In the last two episodes, there's a variety of different kinds of musical performances. So it was a great challenge, but a great pleasure for me to figure out how to do each of them, because in the seventh episode, most of the musical scenes revolve around the recording of an album. And so we see the studio, the club set up as if it's a recording studio, and we record each of the tracks separately. And so that created new challenges in how to keep it interesting when you're just shooting the whole track and it's just Jude, the bass player, who's playing. And then in episode 8, there's a standard club-based live performance when Elliot and Julie perform together. Spoiler. And that was amazing because I was able to shoot it. We made the club as full as it's ever been, and I was able to shoot it with three cameras, the way we've been shooting our live performances throughout the season. But then the last scene of episode 8 was the band playing out in the street, which is something we had never done. And it was a huge challenge because the acoustics are not great out in the street. And we had the members of the band playing instruments and singing and dancing and interacting with people. And so to do all that while trying to get usable tracks was probably the biggest challenge of the two episodes for me. Also because they were traversing, they're walking down the street at this Rue Morbier, this particular triangle where there's lots of cafes in Paris. And from the beginning of the song to the end, they're covering about 100 yards. And I wanted to be able to shoot full takes, because that's the way we work. We shoot full takes, and that's the way you get the live energy and not have to break it up. But in order to do that, the recording engineers had to be able to get a clear signal outside without wires over the course of a 100-meter stretch. And it took a huge amount of ingenuity on the part of Scott Campbell, our recording engineer, and Stéphane Boucher, our sound recording mixer, to figure out how to relay a number of kind of high-tech receivers so that the band could walk the whole length of this shot and keep giving a clear signal as they were recording.
Wow. Well, let's actually go all the way back to the beginning. How did you come to first be involved with the Eddy?
Glenn Ballard, actually, if I want to go back to the very beginning, it's Sam Schwartz, who is Glenn Ballard's agent, whom I've known for years, called me up and said, Glenn wants to come in and talk to you. And of course, I'd never met Glenn, but I was aware of who he is, and I was a fan. And he came to see me in my office, and he gave me a CD of songs that he had put together a band to record, and that he, of course, had written. And said, I want to use these songs as the basis for a show about a jazz club in contemporary Paris. And I was like, okay, nice to meet you. Great idea. There's no story here. I said, well, let me have a think and a listen. I went away, and I was so taken with the songs. And when I listened to the songs, I understood that what Glenn was trying to do was kind of reinvigorate jazz as an idiom that had been at the center of American popular music for much of the 20th century. In a sense, the Great American Songbook, Gershwin, Kern, Arlen, was really based on jazz harmonies and jazz rhythms. And Glenn was trying to go back to those roots as well as the authentic roots of jazz from the 20s. So I was very inspired by the songs. And then I went to see the band that Glenn had put together called the Eddy Band. I went to see them play, and I felt like, okay, there's something here. We just have to figure out what the next step is in terms of building a show around these assets. And that's what took me to Damien.
Mm-hmm. So what was it actually like to work with Damien Chazelle on his first big TV series?
Damien is, we know he's an incredibly nice guy because everybody knows that. That's out there, I believe. But he's also an incredibly generous collaborator, and also he preps harder than anybody I've ever worked with. He is full of humility, and just, I mean, working with him was honestly, I don't want to sound treacly, but it was a pleasure every day. And when I first approached Damien, he was, I mean, he had already been spotted as somebody of enormous talent. It isn't like, you know, that was well known just from the proof of concept 10-minute short of Whiplash that he had made in order to finance the film. But he hadn't yet, because Whiplash had not been released yet, so he hadn't yet become, you know, the hottest guy in town, or however you want to describe Damien now. But so it was over the course of over 5 years, he stayed very steadfast and true to the project, and stayed involved all the way through the shooting of La La Land and the shooting of First Man. And then when he was in post on First Man is when we were gearing up to go into production. And that's when Damien was able to really focus more on the details of the show, but he never wavered in his commitment. And I consider that extraordinary. And it speaks so highly of him as an artist and as a human being.
Mm-hmm. And as an executive producer also on the series, were there ideas that you specifically had just from your background in television that you brought to the table to help execute this show?
Yeah, because for me, in my history, and if you look at the shows I've been drawn to, they tend to be very, very character driven. And this was from the outset meant to be a character driven piece, even though paradoxically it started with the music, and then we had to figure out who the characters were who were going to build the story around the music. But I think the attention to character and performance is something that I am very focused on every show that I make. And then in terms of the stylistic choices, those were made in conjunction with Damien, and then Damien carried those forward on his own as he set about prepping the first 2 episodes. But we did come to an agreement very early on that this was going to feel spontaneous, new wave, very Tay style, handheld. Those were all decisions that were made very early on and that we didn't waver from, because it felt immediately felt that was what the material called for.
Mm-hmm. And this is also a multilingual show. You've got characters speaking in English and French and Arabic, sometimes all within the same scene. So, I mean, how do you navigate that as a director, just keeping it all of a piece and making sure it's reflecting the speech patterns of these characters with different backgrounds and the knowledge of different languages?
In terms of the multilingual nature of the show, which was baked in from the beginning, we were very lucky in 2 facets. One was that we were working with Netflix International. So we knew the show was going to be a French-based production, but Netflix was interested in mixing as many different languages as possible. They were not daunted by the mix of languages. They were not daunted by the fact that half the show would have to be subtitled for whoever was watching. And they encouraged us to push for authenticity in terms of how people would actually speak, which was great. And then the second piece of luck was we had our on-set kind of dialogue coach, a dialect coach, was a woman named Dani Héricourt, who is French and English, and completely native in both languages. And having her there gave the actors the confidence to switch back and forth, helped us with nuances when we might change the pattern of which lines in a scene were going to be in French and which were going to be in English. And so having Dani by our side, we were able to, because I'm sure you've heard that there was sometimes an improvisatory nature to the scenes as we rehearsed them, as we shot them, but having Dani there knew that we were never going to miss a beat in terms of the authenticity of language.
Mm-hmm. And the show certainly has a very strong cast led by Andre Holland. You've got Amanda Stenberg, Joanna Kulig. What was it like just working with this cast of actors?
This was a dream cast. We had Francine Maisler as our U.S. casting director, and then we carried on with a casting director named Laure Kochner in Paris. But getting Andre, Amanda, Joanna, Leila Bekti, and Tahar Rahim as sort of the 5 leads was really amazing and set the bar very high for casting and for performance on the show. And I think that they were drawn to the material, but I can't pretend otherwise that having Damien on board as an executive producer, having Damien directing the first 2 episodes was a big draw in terms of getting cast, and made the process easier than it might have been otherwise, because the show involves speaking in several languages. It involves non-musicians having to sometimes play an instrument. So it was, it was a big challenge for an actor. And I think that having Damien really gave everybody the confidence to come on board.
Mm-hmm. I was also reading somewhere just about how all the different directors, you had 4 directors, including you, they were all encouraged to provide their own little flourishes, basically, to the episodes that they directed, all having somewhat of a similar kind of verite style, but still there are some differences. So when you were approaching, these final 2 episodes, what did you personally do as a director to just make them yours?
It was interesting because, yes, we had encouraged all the directors to really take ownership of their episodes, as long as we stayed within the same general frame of reference that it would still feel like the Eddy. And in hiring the directors, we were clearly going in a very auteurist direction, which of course is perfectly appropriate when you're working in France, because France is an auteurist country. What they call the droit d'auteur, the right of the author, extends even to television directors, unlike in the US. So it all made a lot of sense for me, because I had been on set the whole time, and I had I had prepped with all the other directors. It becomes a little bit difficult to say, okay, wait, now it's my baby, what would I do? But the thing that guided me in terms of taking ownership of my episodes was that because they were the 2 climactic episodes, they were more plot driven, and had more big climactic sequences than some of the earlier episodes. And so it was striking the right balance to keep the spontaneity and verite aspects that had become the signatures of the show, while still being able to make the big moments play big.
Right. And you've been working in television for a few decades now, and I'm just curious to know if you'll actually take anything away from your experience on the Eddy that you feel like maybe you didn't really have before you started working on the show.
Oh yeah, I mean, totally. For me as a director, having come up in American television, even though I came up in premium and cable, I'm a meticulous prepper. I do shot lists, I do storyboards, and I come in with a sense of exactly what I want from a scene and exactly how I'm going to get that out of a scene. It's the way I was trained. And on the Eddy, that would be a constricting philosophy. And on the Eddy, you have to sort of take everything and throw it out and say, okay, I know what the heart of the scene is, and now I'm going to collaborate with camera and with the actors to make that happen. But it had to be collaborative. So I never did a shot list on the Eddy, which was strange and kind of scary to me at first, but I didn't do shot lists. I'd come out, and also didn't do rehearsals. I'm very big on rehearsals, but generally on the Eddy, the rehearsals happen on film, because you want to be able to capture anything spontaneous that might happen, and you can rehearse all you want, and the actors generally come alive when the camera starts rolling. So without shot lists and without rehearsals, you would just start shooting a scene, and then by take 4 or 5 or 6, you would see the scene, with discussion, with directing, with working with camera and the actors, you would see the scene begin to take shape. But it was this very kind of holistic process of watching the scene take shape in front of you, and all you had to do was just be attuned enough to sort of be able to push it in this direction or that direction. And it was incredibly exciting and inspiring, but you are flying without a net. And that was something that, now having experienced that style, I would definitely like to delve more into that direction.
Sounds a little like performing jazz, if you will.
Well, that metaphor's been worked to death on the show, but it still holds up. It does still hold up.
Yes. Well, since we're an awards website, I have to ask about just your history with the Emmys. Nominated 7 times, many of them for one of my favorite shows of all time, 6 Feet Under. When you look back on that period of time in your career, getting all that acclaim, working with that incredible ensemble, what comes to mind for you?
Particularly 6 Feet Under, you mean?
Yeah.
First, as a footnote, I'll say that because 6 Feet Under won a lot of Emmys, but it never won the Emmy for Best Drama Series. But I did win an Emmy very early in my career for Best Historical Program, Best Historical Documentary Program, for a series I did in the early 90s called The Pacific Century for PBS. And that's my win. Right. The rest is the history of many, many nominations. But 6 Feet Under was, it'd be very hard for a series to match what happened on that show in terms of just a sense of completion and partnership. The show was blessed, and until I started making a lot of other shows, I didn't realize how blessed it had been. Alan Ball wrote the pilot script on spec based on a suggestion that Carolyn Strauss of HBO was running HBO at that time had given him. He turned in the pilot, and she said, "Let's shoot this." Alan called me because we had talked about some other things previously, and the two of us came on board to make the pilot. And then we delivered the pilot, and on a Friday, and on Monday morning we got the call that we'd been picked up to series, and by Chris Albrecht, who was president of HBO then. And we shot the entire first season before anything aired. And the weekend before the pilot aired on HBO, we got picked up for a second season without the show even having aired. So it was just an accumulation of all these things that just don't happen, and that I was too young to appreciate how extraordinary it was, but I do now. And in fact, in terms of the writer's room on 6 Feet Under, there were very few changes throughout the 5 seasons. And from season 3 onward, we had the exact same people in the writer's room for 3 seasons in a row, so there were all these ways that it just fit as a family and fit as part of the HBO family that I think we were fortunate. I think we were hitting a pocket of that new golden age of TV. And HBO at its peak, but it just was there just could never be an experience as fully satisfying as that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Alan, for talking to us today. We really appreciate it. And for those of you,
pleasure, Kevin.
For those of you watching, feel free to hit like and subscribe for more interviews just like this, and head to goldderby.com to start making your Emmy predictions. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Kevin.